The consequences of childhood emotional neglect are going to be maladaptive behavioral patterns and a life of loneliness. If this interests you, keep listening. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. Today I'm going to talk to you about the impact that childhood emotional neglect has on your life. And this needs to be made aware of so you know how to deal with them. Because it's going to affect your ability to relate to people, your relationships, your friendships, even coworkers, especially your own children if you have children. Now, childhood emotional neglect can have a lasting impact on an individual's ability to form and maintain healthy relationships into adulthood, even through college. And there's a subtle yet profound effect that childhood emotional neglect has upon the, call it the emotional landscape and sense of self-worth and knowing what one's needs and wants are. And the ability to emote and express yourself effectively so you can interact and engage people in an authentic manner. The relationship dynamics often involve a sense of seeking validation or a sense of avoidance because you want to avoid feeling rejected. And there's a sense of extreme shyness as a result of this, an inability to read social cues. It's basically a maladaptive ability to interpret social cues and, be able to relate to even groups of people. So let's dive right in. There's going to be a bunch of them here. I've got them written down, so I'm going to read them off. I don't have all this memorized. But I'm making this video because in the previous video, I talked about the 8 signs of childhood emotional neglect. And I'm doing these series because I suffered from this. I have trauma in my childhood. And I'm not trying to say my parents were bad. They just had other things that were more important, like paying the bills and the mortgage, where they just didn't really empathize with me. And I didn't realize, the impact that had until I learned about childhood emotional neglect syndrome. And it really just made a lot of sense in my own life. Now, number 1, difficulty expressing emotions. If you don't know how you feel, you don't know what you're feeling, you're not going to be able to express your emotions. Your emotions are essentially your mind's response to how you feel. Your felt sense is really what happens in response to the world. You hear, see, smell, taste, touch something, and then there's a felt response in the brain, and that felt response is then interpreted by the mind and turned into an emotional drama, a story about what happened. And often that story, filled with the drama that it's, that it's included, often is not a true interpretation of life. It is a reaction to life and not really a comprehension of life. So there often comes, just a misinterpretation of social cues, and therefore you don't respond well to what other people say or how they say it, and often become antisocial or shy as a result of it. So number 1, difficulty expressing emotions. You can't identify, express, or communicate effectively because you just don't know how you feel. And it creates a lot of misunderstandings, especially in marriages. So if you can't express how you feel, no one is going to understand you. And if you can't read the social cues, you're not going to understand other people because most relationships are emotionally based. And social cues are always emotionally based. So you're reading this body language, tone of voice, and you're only hearing what they're saying and getting lost in the words and not exactly how they're saying it or what they're feeling behind the saying because you're not in tune with your own feelings. You're not in tune with other people's feelings. It's very difficult to empathize with others if you're not in tune with your own emotions, hence the difficulty in expressing emotions and interpersonal problems. Number 2, emotional distance. You may find yourself being cold, or a person is cold that you know, and they're suffering from childhood emotional neglect because they just don't express their emotions. They don't even feel their emotions. They're essentially numb to their how they feel because that's the way they're raised. They're taught to invalidate their own emotions, and their self-worth is emotional based, and therefore they lack self-worth as well. And they want to avoid feeling rejected and validated, so there's a sense of just emotional distance. You may find yourself feeling this way, like you're the outsider looking in all the time. You feel like you never belong. You have difficulty connecting on a deep emotional level with people. And you may find yourself feeling extremely guarded. You don't want to let anybody in because of that deep sense of low self-worth and rejection that you felt as a child. And you want to protect yourself from this rejection and invalidation. So you become cold and distant. Number 3 is the fear of vulnerability. Because whenever you expressed your emotions to your parents, they flat out rejected or didn't even listen to them. They ignored them. So you're not really familiar with exactly how you feel, the fear, the despair, the anguish, and it's scary. It's scary to share those feelings, the feelings of just unworthiness. And you don't really trust your own feelings. Therefore, it's going to be hard to expose how you feel. And you're going to feel naked. And it's like walking down the road naked. You feel exposed. And because there is so much rejection and invalidation, that exposure to your emotions actually makes you feel invalidated and rejected. So you're really avoiding feeling hurt, emotionally hurt, which is the invalidation, the discrediting of how you feel. No, you don't really feel that way. Or your feelings don't matter. Just shut up. Get back to work. You're not tired. What are you sad about this time? You hear things like that growing up, and then you start to invalidate your own emotions. So you don't know how to really be with another person emotionally because it's scary to you to start to actually feel what's happening. Number 4, difficulty trusting. Relationships are emotionally based. We're emotional creatures. And no matter how, even in these videos, I try to sound like I know what I'm talking about because I want to investigate and be able to articulate what it is that I'm researching and what it is that I'm incorporating in my own life and have found to share with you this knowledge so it can raise your awareness. And even I get self-conscious about what I say, how I articulate it, and the words I use, and even I forget about the emotional aspect of what I'm saying. And when you are like that all the time, at the bar or hanging out with friends, and all it is this dry, stoic, cold interaction, no one's going to really know who you are. And if nobody knows who you are, they're not going to trust you. And if you can't relate to other people, their emotions, people love empathy. People want to be gotten. They want to feel understood. And if you can't make them feel understood, they're not going to trust you. In other words, trust is the foundation of relationships. And most people want to feel safe. They want to feel supported, and they want to feel a degree of pleasure and fun. But it's that sense of safety and support that is paramount that creates trust. People don't feel safe around people they don't trust. And if your feelings were invalidated, you don't trust your own feelings. So how can you trust other people? And when you begin to avoid and play a whole lot of deflection patterns to hide your own feelings, people are going to look at you as this person is not authentic, and they're not going to trust you. You don't trust them, and they don't trust you. It goes both ways because you're actually avoiding feeling the invalidation that you felt by your parents. It's not a pleasant feeling to walk around feeling invalidated and unworthy. Nobody wants to feel like that all the time, so we suppress it. And it goes down to our unconscious mind, but it comes out in neurotic behavioral patterns. The need for validation, the need for admiration, the need for attention. And when you become selfish in that way, people will look at you. They may call you a narcissist. It's not being a narcissist. It's just one aspect of narcissism. There's many people like to be admired. It's the strongest desire in mankind is to be admired. But when you're avoiding feeling invalidated, you're going to avoid interacting with people in an authentic way. That creates distrust on both sides. Now, the 5th one is going to be conflict avoidance. Always avoiding working things out, having that conversation. Look, yesterday when you left early and you didn't tell me, I was wondering where you were, and everyone was wondering where you were. Just even a conversation like that, like what's going on. Or listen, I have a problem when and then you don't have those conversations. There's no intimacy. You look at that as, well, that could be potentially harmful to my sense of self, my emotional well-being, my self-worth. So therefore you avoid it. There's a lot of people who are passive aggressive. They avoid working things out, discussing things because of this. They look at discussing a problem as being confrontational, when in fact it is not. But for them, it's confrontational to their own sense of self, because now they have to become aware of their true disposition, which is a sense of low self-worth and a sense of feeling invalidated. And they don't know how to validate themselves, therefore they don't know how to validate other people. So there's problems in communication that creates a sense of, they don't know what to do. And you feel lost and scared and not very confident in those moments, so you avoid all sense of conflict. Standing up for yourself. Hey, lay off. That's my girl. Don't talk to her that way. Things of that nature. I don't like the way you talk to me. You're being very disrespectful right now. You're unable to say that because it's basically a boundary issue. You don't really have a strong sense of self, so you don't really have a sense of boundary with other people. And that boundary, all of a sudden, it breaks some type of self-perception within you that scares you. That's why you avoid conflict. Now, number 6, low self-esteem and low self-worth. If you don't honor your own feelings, you're not going to actually know what it means to be worthy, because self-worth is how you feel about yourself. And if you can't feel anything, you're not going to feel any sense of self-worth. You're going to be numb. Self-esteem is what you think about yourself. If you don't think highly of yourself, could lead to self-doubt, especially in relationships. Studies show the absence of emotional validation leads to low self-worth and low self-esteem. If you don't have any sense of value for yourself, you maybe become a people pleaser. You may settle for something less than what you're truly worth, or you may even tolerate mistreatment. Because of low self-worth and low self-esteem, you may become this people pleaser, and you may be putting up with a lot of mistreatment as a result of that. Number 7, seeking validation from others. Adults who experience childhood emotional neglect as children unconsciously seek validation to compensate for their emotional neglect, that feeling of being rejected and invalidated. They compensate for that in their adulthood by seeking validation. And it leads to codependent behaviors. You only hang out with people who praise you, who admire you, but never tell it like it is. They're never honest with you. But you're okay with that, because as long as you keep getting the praise, then you see them as being supportive of who you are, but they never tell you the truth. But you'll see how this is played out. The constant need for validation, especially in young women and young men, I see this usually in the 20-something, right after college. Because the college ideals are often not really honored in the real world, in the working world, the 9-to-5 world. They don't care about politics and pollution and the history of Native Americans or anything like that. They're just worried about their job and their career and their family. So college introduces, this is what happened to me. College, we got on this very idealistic way of thinking and how the world should be. And when you're in a group of people who think the same way, you feel validated in a sense of a community. Yeah, the world should be a certain way. And why isn't it like that? And let's rebel against the world because it isn't like that. And when you graduate, all of those values are like, nobody cares about that stuff. They only care about do your job. You're hired to do a job. You don't show up, you're going to be fired. You don't do your job well, you're going to be fired. I don't care about you want to talk about that stuff, we'll talk about it after work. But you don't bring it to work. So that sense of seeking validation happens in a lot of people in their mid-20s. And you can tell they're looking to have their viewpoint and their emotions validated. And it's really apparent. You'll see this on TikTok. You'll see this on Instagram. Validate me, validate me, validate me, is essentially what a lot of people are saying underneath what they're saying. And it's really to compensate for the emotional neglect, that sense of rejection during childhood. Because they feel invalidated, they don't know how to validate themselves because they don't honor their own emotions. So they want other people to honor their emotions for them. In other words, you want to be loved, but you don't want to love. You see the difference there? You want other people to love you, but you don't want to love them or even love yourself because you don't know how. So that's why the seeking outside of yourself for validation is very commonplace for people with childhood emotional neglect. And that doesn't create a healthy sense of relationships with others. Because then you're just also, in a certain way, you're using people for validation. As soon as they stop validating you, you stop talking to them. You say they're mean. You got something bad to say about them because they're not validating you. You know, it's not their job to validate you. It's not the job of everybody around you to validate you. It's unrealistic to expect every single person in life who you come upon to validate you. Now, if you want validation from somebody, it's usually a close friend, like a confidant. Hey, I want to brainstorm some ideas. What do you think? Or I'm having problems with my girlfriend. You know, am I just doubting myself? Am I blowing it up out of proportion? You have someone close to you that you talk to, but you don't seek it from everybody. Now, difficulty setting boundaries because you don't have a sense of respect for your own feelings. You're not going to respect other people's feelings. You don't know your own needs because they're usually emotional. Like men want to feel respected. We want to feel needed. We want to feel appreciated. Women want to feel desired. They want to feel beautiful. And they want to feel like you believe in them. And if a person is not getting it from either sex, they're going to seek it somewhere else. And if the relationship is all about validation, then it's all about your emotional needs. And you're not really respecting the emotional needs of them. In other words, you're not going to listen to them. You're not going to validate them because you can't validate yourself. You don't have a sense of self. You don't have a sense of boundaries with others. So it's going to be hard to say no. You're going to seek validation. So you're always going to be a yes man, a people pleaser. And that doesn't really go over well. You know, I mean, you have a fear of being rejected. So you say yes to everything. And that yes man, that yes girl looks like a kiss ass. And you can tell that person isn't really genuine or authentic. They don't stand for anything. An authentic person stands for something. And when you're around a person who doesn't stand for anything, they're just agreeing with everything, then you begin to wonder, well, who are they? And can you really trust them? So there's no real boundaries. You got to learn to say no, thank you, yes, and please. Number 9. The pattern of unfulfilling relationships. Because you're afraid to be vulnerable, because you can't validate other people's feelings, you're not going to really acknowledge what they feel. You're not going to have an emotional connection. It may be sexual, it may be physical attraction. You may share the same ideas about things, which is why you date and got into a relationship. But in the long run, it will fall apart. Because if you're not opening up emotionally, there's not going to be any trust. Meaning if you're just out for your own validation, you're just out for yourself. It means you can turn on them in any given moment. There's, people with childhood emotional neglect tend to be drawn to relationships that mirror the emotional dynamics of their childhood relationship with their parents. And it's just an unconscious drive, so we can work it out as adults. The thing is it plays itself out in a very toxic way. Because there's a lot of arguing and fighting. Why don't you understand me? How come you don't know what I want? How come you don't know what I need? Well, when you say this, I feel this way. And, it creates a lot of discord. Now, the pattern of choosing partners who are emotionally unavailable is commonplace, and they're not willing to meet their emotional needs, just like their parents couldn't meet their emotional needs. And then they go around feeling lonely within the relationship. And they want to blame their partner. They don't do this for me. They don't understand me. And you constantly go to people who are emotionally unavailable. And that's what creates unfulfilling relationships. It's this pattern of you're trying to repeat, because that's what love is to you. When you have an experience of what you believe to be love as a child during 0 to 7 or the developmental years, and when you experience a certain way of being fed, being clothed, having a roof over your head, being tucked into bed, but there's an emotional dynamic that is absent, you think that's the way love is. And when you experience love in another way, someone who's really empathetic with you, really nurturing, really there for you, really present with you, it may scare you because it's unfamiliar. In fact, that's what happens in a lot of trauma bonding. You have, you know, complex post-traumatic stress disorder as a child. That happens, or even PTSD. If you have abusive parents, narcissistic parents who just were demoralizing and just flat out mean. This is another level of childhood emotional neglect. This is abuse. Parents who, you know, gave or did not give enough empathy didn't do it on purpose. You know, they weren't bad, evil parents trying to make their children suffer. They just had a lot on their mind, usually mortgage payments and bills and work problems, that they just couldn't be emotionally available and fully present for their children. I mean, that's really usually the cause of it. When you have a narcissistic parent, this is another level of abuse. You know, it's going to really create a lot of invalidation, a lot of emotional dysregulation, and you're going to seek the same kind of pattern. And you see the trauma bonding, where there's an exchange of abuse between two of them, yelling and arguing, fighting, and the sex makeup, you know, the makeup sex is, oh, they stay together. And you're like, well, this is really dysfunctional. You know, that's taking it to another level, but you get the idea of where it can lead to. How it's dysfunctional. It doesn't work. There's no real clear communication. There's no expression of what one wants and what needs, and a mutual respect of each other's wants and needs, and knowing how to fulfill their emotional needs together so they both feel respected. The isolation and loneliness, number 10. Because there is a pattern of unfulfilling relationships, you kind of don't really relate to people. There's a sense of isolation and loneliness. I think Sean Penn said in the movie Thin Red Line, his character in there, another character said, you know, do you ever feel alone? And he said, only around people. This is common with childhood emotional neglect because that sense of emptiness, it gets amplified when you're around people because you see other people connecting, they're emoting, they're laughing. There's an exchange of emotion, and you're just emotionally absent because of your childhood emotional neglect. Your emotions are invalidated, so you just don't even pay attention to them, and you come across as just intellectual. And it's hard to form deep connections with people if you're not emotional. And there's a sense of emotional emptiness all the time. Because it's the emptiness that's the invalidation, actually. That sense of emptiness is the invalidation that you felt as a child. And it is only through that emptiness that you find your emotions deep down in the lake. You got to dive deep in that feeling of emptiness to find out how you feel. Sometimes sadness, feeling sad, is really just your body wanting to rest. You know, learning to interpret how you feel and what you feel is really a bodily sensational experience. It's a felt sense. And if you're not in your body, you're not grounded, you're not going to know how you feel. So if you're in your head all the time, you're not emoting, you're not exhibiting any emotions, you're not relating to other people's emotions, there's always going to be you're not going to have a deep sense of connection with others. You're never going to form, you know, close friends with people. Hence the sense of isolation and loneliness. Number 11, difficulty reading emotions. Because you can't read other people's emotions because you can't read your own emotions. If you can't empathize with people, you know, you're not going to really relate to people effectively. People are not going to relate to you very effectively either because they're going to tell that you're not fully present with them, that you're not empathizing with them. They're not going to feel validated or acknowledged, and pretty soon you'll see those people just leave you because you're not really empathizing with them. There are studies that show that it's difficult for people with childhood emotional neglect to empathize with people around them. Number 12, that leads to struggle with intimacy. And this is really a problem with marriage. You know, if you can't be vulnerable because you don't know what you're feeling, or it's very uncomfortable for you to emote and share your feelings, it leads to, you're going to struggle engaging with your loved one. And this level of intimacy really stems, or I should say this lack of level of intimacy stems from a fear of rejection. Your emotions were rejected. Your emotions were invalidated. Your emotions were made, or you were made to feel insignificant as a child. And therefore, that's your identity, making your own emotions insignificant. And you know you feel them, you may have, your emotions are going to come up. This is a person who often stifles their emotions, and then it builds and builds and builds, and they explode because they don't know how to process their emotions. Emotions are a process. It's really just a process of the mind to interpret reality, to have a greater understanding of reality, of life, so you can relate to it more effectively and gain mastery over your life rather than being a victim. You know, a sailor wants to sail in the ocean, not just be tossed around by the waves. And pretending the waves aren't there is not going to get you in a boat to where you want to be. So that you need to know how to navigate these deep connections, this kind of vulnerability, this emotional vulnerability and sharing of your emotions with your partner, husband or wife or whatever, to be able to create a sense of intimacy. And this is a real challenge for you. And I get it. I've been there. It wasn't until I went into psychological counseling where I realized this person is not here to judge me. They're not here to reject me. They're here to help me. So I'm just going to, what the hell? I'm going to just spill my guts. And I began to wear my heart on my sleeve after that, which made people uncomfortable too, certain people. You know, there's certain people you want to share your feelings with. There's other people you don't want to share your feelings with. It all depends on the degree of friendship and the degree of trust and the degree of confidence you have in them and the dynamics of your relationship. You don't share your feelings with an acquaintance, maybe just what you like, what brings you joy, but you wouldn't share your problems, your sense of sadness or grief. You know, the sense of sadness or grief you may be feeling, a struggle in life, the stress, the sense of self-doubt is probably shared with a confidant that you know they're going to respect how you feel and be supportive. So, you know, you don't want to be intimate with everybody. And if you can't trust your spouse to be intimate with, well, then that may be a sign of that you're not right for each other. But struggle with intimacy, you know, all kinds of interrelationship problems is what happens here. In fact, I looked up some studies, and an article called The Influence of Childhood Emotional Neglect on Emotional Face Processing in Young Adults, put out by the Academy of Psychology in 2023 February issue. And it basically says childhood emotional neglect refers to a failure to meet basic emotional needs of a child, which can seriously impact interpersonal communication and psychological health in young adults. Emotional face processing is critical in interpersonal communication. Childhood emotional neglect causes delayed emotional face processing in young adults, which may be related to unresponsive, unavailable, and limited interaction patterns between parents and their children. Another article called The Adverse Childhood Experiences and Behavioral Problems in Middle Childhood in Child Abuse Neglect, published May in 2017, said children as young as 9 years old begin to show behavioral problems after exposure to early childhood adversities. Another article called The Childhood Emotional Neglect Predicts Empathetic Accuracy in Social Inclusion and Exclusion Contexts in Psychology Journal, August of 2022, said that the previous studies shown that individuals with a history of childhood emotional neglect show impaired empathy. Another article called the name of it is Associations of Childhood Emotional Neglect and Psychological and Physical Neglect with Mental Health and Substance Abuse in Young Adults. This is the Australian New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry, April of 2022, says the emotional neglect is a risk factor for mental problems in early adulthood. Research that combines emotional and physical neglect into a single exposure may be obscuring relationships with mental health. Mental health prevention and treatment must screen for and address emotional neglect. And that's what happens. It really impacts your relationships. And if you think of life, all of life is a relationship with someone or something, even yourself. And how you relate with your own environment is really how you relate to yourself. Often a messy room is a sign of trauma, is a sign of emotional disturbance. If you can't organize yourself and stabilize your own mind, you're going to have a hard time creating a tidy environment around you. Everything will be a mess. Time management becomes a mess. This is a relationship with your own life. Relationship with friends, as I stated, you're going to find yourself isolated and lonely because there's a lack of empathy. There's a lack of interpersonal skills. You're not going to read social cues. You're not going to share emotional, expression and emote with others and empathize and share there's just any kind of emotion with other people because you're stifling your own emotions inside of you. And it's going to affect your romantic relationships, your professional relationships, and the existing relationships you have with your friends and your family. Now, the good news is this is not incurable. Learning to empathize with yourself, learning to feel your own feelings by tuning into your body. It's really a felt sense that how do you know what you're feeling? And it actually engages your conscious mind into your body awareness. And you begin to feel sensations in the body. These felt senses are the foundation of your emotions. Your mind then interprets these felt senses and turns them into these drama stories that we call emotions. And we emote, we express them because that's our personal perspective on life. It's not just intellectual. Personal perspective is comprised with an emotional reaction and an emotional value system. What makes you feel safe? What gives you joy? What do you like? What gives you a sense of certainty? What gives you a sense of reassuredness? What gives you a sense of adventure? What makes you afraid? What makes you mad? What makes you sad? What makes you feel surprised? Feeling disgust? All of these reactions, these emoting reactions is a process. It's just your brain processing information at an emotional level. And what is the world? What's going on in the world? As infants, we actually interpret the world through our emotions. And there's a sense of, an emotional value system that's developed as an infant. And that value system gets crushed through the childhood emotional neglect, through the parents who are emotionally absent, unempathetic, ignoring your emotions or invalidating your emotions. That emotional value system gets crushed, and then you don't have a real personal value system. You basically take on the value system of other people, of school primarily. Right from wrong, good from bad, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. And then you don't feel authentic. And you live a life of inauthenticity. You can't be happy. You can't choose a career just to satisfy your parents or people around you for status quo, to make your parents proud. You choose a career and a way of life that's fulfilling to you. But if you don't know what's fulfilling to you, you don't know what to do with yourself. And these are the problems that childhood emotional neglect creates. Now, there's exercises to get in touch with your core values, to find out what truly matters to you, what really brings a sense of true joy, into your heart, and what brings you a sense of gratitude, what gives you a sense of trust and safety, and you can recall these and cultivate these as an adult and deal with these emotional problems as an adult because now you're more mature, your cognition is more developed. So you can actually use your thoughts and your cognition to influence how you feel and create feelings or dissolve old feelings. And this all can be done. I've done it myself and I've done it with my clients. This is something you're interested in. As a transformational mind coach, I find trauma to be a large part of my clients because when you want to lead your own life, you want to create a goal for yourself, the real challenge and commitment comes from trauma. It comes from these emotional wounds within that your mind is fixated on. It's trying to process it. What the hell happened? And there's a sense of procrastination, a sense of hesitation. It's just a lack of commitment to following through because you're preoccupied with processing these bad emotions, these feelings of rejection, feelings of invalidation, and you're trying to discover what really matters to you. What's your true value system? And that's where I come in. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment below. My contact information will be below the video. I sure hope that helps. This is Dr. Spencer Coaches. Thank you so much for listening.